Hi there. I'm Scot McGill. I want to thank, first of all, the Menil for inviting me to speak tonight, and Carl in particular. Now, I have to say I'm a classicist by trade, Latin and Greek, so I'm not used to speaking in front of so many people. Right? Usually our classes aren't quite this big, but I'm excited about it and certainly looking forward to it. And looking forward to telling you a bit about Pythagoras, the person with whom the idea of the music of the spheres originated. So I thought tonight, in the time I have, I would tell you a bit about him, about his biography, and then lead you to some ideas about music that originated with him, and then talk about the music of the spheres themselves, okay, and his ideas about them. So, as Carl said, Pythagoras is a 6th century Greek philosopher. So he's born probably around 570 BC. Now I say probably, you'll hear the words probably and perhaps quite a bit tonight because there's very little, well, the evidence for him is not altogether rock solid. Okay, so we have a lot of sources on him, but we have no writings from him. Okay, nothing survives from him. There are some forgeries, but nothing from him himself. One of the reasons for this is because it would appear when he taught only orally. So you will have sources from antiquity, when they're citing Pythagoras, will use the Greek autos ephe, which means the man himself said, right? But saying is the important thing there, not the man himself wrote. Okay, so we don't have, as I said, any firsthand primary material from Pythagoras. We do have a lot of sources who talk about him, and this is because his life fascinated the ancients as I think it fascinates, as it fascinates the moderns as well. Okay, so let me move this just a little. So this is a bust of Pythagoras in the Capitoline Museum. Now, Pythagoras, what fascinates, I think, the ancient sources about him is his kind of superhuman qualities and his, according to the sources, kind of quasi-divine qualities. These characteristics of him are present in the stories surrounding his birth. So in the most common story that we hear, and this comes from a later biographer named Iamblichus, don't be kind of embarrassed if you don't know him. Most classicists don't know him, so don't worry. He's roughly 245 to 325 AD, so he's writing long after Pythagoras' own life. But in this story that came down to Iamblichus, Pythagoras' father goes to the oracle at Delphi, and the oracle predicts that his wife will bring forth a son who is supremely beautiful, wise, and good to mankind. Okay, and then Pythagoras is named after the Pythian Apollo. The Pythian Apollo, this is the oracle at Delphi, so this is why he has the name Pythagoras. But even connected to his birth, you have this sense that this is a figure who's, somewhat more, right, than your common mortal. He's born in Samos. I think I have a slide here. So circled in red. So this is Greece, right? And it's on the eastern shore of the Aegean. Okay. He leaves Samos at 18, our sources tell us. There was a tyrant there named Polycrates who, in some way, the sources tell us, compelled Pythagoras to leave the island. Pythagoras felt that he might receive some impediment to his study. The sources are a bit vague about this, but under this tyrant, Pythagoras felt the need to leave Samos. And he began to travel, and during his travels, he studied. And the first person with whom he studied was Thales. Thales is one of the 7 wise men of ancient Greece. He's known to be the first philosopher in ancient Greece, and this is because he tried to explain the world without recourse to mythology. He tried to explain natural phenomena naturally, not in relation to the gods. Okay? So Pythagoras goes to study with Thales. Thales is, again, one of the 7 wise men of Greece. He's great, original thinker. And what does Thales think about Pythagoras? He thinks that Pythagoras is really special, right? More special than Thales himself. That he has a kind of intellect that Thales can kind of only imagine having. So even with that story, we see there too this precocious Pythagoras, right? And this Pythagoras who is, again, something greater, right? Something kind of, again, in touch with some higher forces. Okay, so he acquires knowledge with Thales. He shows great talent. Oh yes, I have a slide on this as well. Oh, this is a bit out of order. I'll come back to that in a second. So a later poet named Ovid, you might have heard of him. He is a Roman poet from late 1st century BC, early 1st century AD. In his poem, The Metamorphoses, he writes about Pythagoras. Okay, in book 15 of the Metamorphoses, it's Pythagoras' vision of how the world works. Okay, and Ovid, to introduce Pythagoras, he writes this: "A man lived here, a Samian by birth, but he had fled from Samos and its masters, and hating tyranny by his own choice became an exile. Though the gods in heaven lived far removed, he approached them in his mind, and things that nature kept from mortal sight his inward eye explored." Okay, this is the way he's understood, right? He approached the gods in his mind, right? Things kept from mortal sight. He's something more than mortal. His inward eye, right? He's able to see. He's able to explore and to approach. As part of his education, then he studies with Thales, and then he moves to the east. He goes to Babylon for a while, and he goes to Egypt. Okay, Egypt first, actually, and then Babylon. In both places, he learns geometry, he learns astronomy, and he learns music. Okay, our sources tell us that this is where he acquires his scientific and musical knowledge, okay, during his travels to the east. He then goes back to Samos. He's 56 years old by this point. He had studied in Egypt, our sources tell us, for 22 years, and in Babylon for 12. Makes his way back to Samos, but then decides to go, and I'll go back here, to Croton, which is in the south of Italy, in what was called Magna Graecia, because the Greeks had colonized that part of Italy in this period of ancient history. He goes there, our sources tell us, because he claims all philosophers live abroad, and demands at home are too great. Here's the notion again that Samos kind of can't contain him. And he feels that there are learned men in Italy in abundance. So he settles here in the south, as I said, in the south of Italy, Magna Graecia. When he settles there, he forms some kind of community. Okay? Another biographer named Diogenes Laertius says he forms a brotherhood or a club. Okay? In this club or brotherhood or school, we can maybe call it, there are secret practices, some esoteric rites involving science and mathematics, and maybe the worship of Apollo as well. There's moral instruction in this community. There's a strict code of conduct. Okay? It was possibly a school. Okay, but we can't be sure what that would mean. Some sources tell us that there were teachers and listeners. That would certainly imply a school. Other sources are a little less clear about that. I think we can say that it's somewhere between a school and a cult. Okay, and a cult not in the negative kind of let's all wear the same sneakers and wait for the mothership kind of cult. Not like that, thankfully. A cult, the word cult in antiquity meant something different. It meant a kind of private circle of knowledge. Okay, some people had access to this kind of knowledge. Others didn't. Those who did were in the cult, and those who didn't were not. Okay, so I think we can understand what Pythagoras' community, using the word cult, but understanding it, I think, differently from how we do today. Now, certainly, too, there was a bit of a cult of personality around Pythagoras. There's certainly that as well. Okay, and I've got a nice passage here from Iamblichus about how Pythagoras was received in Italy. Okay, and the kind of fanfare that he received. So I'll just read this out to you. So this great multitude, and these are the people who come to meet Pythagoras when he arrives in Italy, this great multitude of people likewise receiving laws and mandates from Pythagoras as so many divine precepts, and without which they engaged in no occupation, dwelt together with the greatest general concord, celebrated and ranked by their neighbors among the number of the blessed. At the same time, as we have already observed, they shared their possessions in common. Such also was their reverence for Pythagoras that they numbered him with the gods as a certain beneficent and most philanthropic daimon. And daimon here just means kind of divine spirit. Okay, and some indeed celebrated him as the Pythian Apollo, but others considered him the Hyperborean Apollo, another kind of cult manifestation of Apollo. But the thing to take away from this, right, he's treated divinely himself. Okay, so here's that way in which Pythagoras occupies this space between men and gods because of his knowledge, because of his divine wisdom. Okay. A couple of other things about this school or cult, whatever we choose to call it. There was probably vegetarianism. He practiced vegetarianism in this community, and Ovid again speaks about this, right? He was the first to ban as food for men the flesh of living things, right? Abstain, preserve your bodies unabused, mortals, with food of sin. How vile a crime that flesh should swallow flesh, body should fatten greedy body, life should live upon the death of other lives. Okay, so we had a sense, right, that this was anathema to him. One reason it was anathema to him is that he believed in metempsychosis. And metempsychosis means the traveling of souls, that when you die, your soul outlives you and then it comes to occupy another body. Okay? So the transmigration of souls is another way of saying this. Some of our sources tell us, one tells us that Pythagoras could remember 4 lives he had lived. Another source, Aulus Gellius, a Roman, states that Pythagoras remembered being a courtesan, right? That must have been a lively conversation when he recounted that. And another source tells us that Pythagoras states that he heard a cry of a friend in the barking of a dog. Okay, so he has a dog, but says, wait a minute, that's a friend of mine, but his soul had left that friend's body and that now occupied that of a dog. Now, this means, of course, souls can migrate between species, meaning that they can come to inhabit, well, pigs and cows and things that we eat as meat. So therefore, if you're a meat eater, you're a cannibal in a sense for Pythagoras. Okay, so this is behind some of his thinking here. Okay, of course, one thing I think probably all know Pythagoras for, it's the Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So put the scientist and will have to help. I'm a humanities person, but I think I'm right about this. If you put a 3 at the A, a 4 at the B, and a 5 at the C, then you've got the Pythagorean theorem, right? So, okay. So we all know him for this. Since antiquity, this theorem was credited to Pythagoras himself. Another mathematical kind of concept associated with him was the tetractys, this is called. This is a triangle with 10, right, the 10 dots. They each form their own triangles. 10 was a perfect number for the Pythagoreans, okay? So these mathematical concepts associated with him. Now, mathematics for Pythagoras, they were associated with religion. Okay, and this is because math reflects the principles of the world for Pythagoras. So Aristotle, in his Metaphysics, says that Pythagoreans thought principles of mathematics were the principles of all things. Math, for Pythagoras, there's a mystic sense of truth that math can reveal, according to Pythagoras. Okay? These ideas possibly come from Orpheus. I'm going to very quickly read you one other section from Iamblichus about this idea. So Orpheus, Iamblichus says, having learnt wisdom from his mother in the mountains, he said that the eternal essence of number is the most providential principle of the universe, of heaven and earth, and the intermediate nature. Okay? And farther still, that it is the root of the permanency of divine natures, of gods and daimons. These are the ideas that Pythagoras worked with as well. Okay? The divinity of math. What Pythagoras is after is that ever elusive thing, and that is the secrets of the universe. Right? He wants to know the secrets of the universe. He wants to know these not through recourse to the gods. For him, it's through recourse, especially through mathematics, especially. Okay, not exclusively, but especially. Okay? So this brings us to his ideas about music. Okay. For him, well, the story goes that one day he was passing, and I have this, there's a lot of, yeah, okay. Right, so I have a lot of text here. I'll keep this one up here for a while so you can read it while I speak. He was passing by a blacksmith shop, and he heard the sound of the hammers, and they were all giving off different pitches, and he wanted to figure out why they were giving off these different sounds, okay? And he realized it had to do with the ratio of the hammers, the size of the hammers. Okay, so one is 2/3 the size of another, one is 1/2 the size of another, and this gave him an idea that the difference in musical pitch had to do with mathematical ratios. Okay? So he goes home and he rigs up this contraption, and the story goes on here. Rigs up this contraption with some cords, and he puts weights on the ends of them. He discovers that the cord stretched by the greatest weight produced when compared with that with the smallest weight, produced a sound that's the equivalent of an octave. Okay? And then he had these other chords as well, and he realized that, again, the musical interval having to do with these ratios, with the frequency the frequency ratio. So he discovered the perfect fifth, which my musical students tell me is 7 half steps from C to G, and the perfect fourth, which is C to F. Okay, so but he figures these things out, and he figures them out mathematically. Music is also a very important thing to the Pythagoreans. There's a sense in which there's divine expression in music, but it's expressed again because of math, right? Math is at the basis of it. Okay, and that's what's fundamental to the Pythagorean view here. Okay, and then this leads us to the music of the spheres. Okay, and you'll see in this as well. You've got this sense again that he's able to understand things that others can't. He's able to understand ineffable things. He's able to fix his intellect on the sublime, right? Okay, so this is again all that we've seen so far about Pythagoras, also expressed here. The notion of the music of the spheres is that the pitch of notes depends upon the speed of vibrations. Planets move at different rates of motion, and so they must produce a sound, and the sound varies according to the rates of motion. So you have ratios again here at the basis of it. Okay, so he had a notion that the planets did move. It's probable that this idea is not heliocentric. Okay, some sources tell us he had a version of heliocentrism, but certainly the music of the spheres has Earth at the center of things. Okay, but the planets otherwise revolve. As they revolve, they produce pitches, and because of the ways in which these sounds relate to one another, the ratios of them, they produce this harmony. Okay, this harmony. Now, I'll just end here. Here's saying exactly that. I move on to a Roman author named Cicero, again, who might be familiar to some of you. In one of his works on the Republic, De Republica, he has a section devoted to, called The Dream of Scipio, in which the younger Scipio Aemilianus discovers the elder Scipio Africanus. He has a vision of him from the afterlife, and Scipio Africanus tells Scipio Aemilianus, the younger one, about the music of the spheres. Okay? And you can read it here. What I want to end with here, though, is the next slide. I hope I've kept this up long enough for you to at least get a sense of it. And that is that, right, that men's ears can't hear these things, right? For you, you have no duller sense than that of hearing, but this mighty music produced by the revolution of the whole universe at the highest speed cannot be perceived by human ears any more than you can look straight at the sun, your sense of sight being overpowered by its radiance. Okay, ooh. Oh, okay, that is the end. Okay, never mind, sorry. So, I thought I had one more. Okay, sorry about that. But the idea that Cicero has, and this reflects Pythagorean thinking, is that this music of the spheres is more beautiful than we can imagine. Okay, there's an aesthetic quality to this music that is truly divine, right? But again, it's produced by these physical properties. The universe must be harmonious in this way of thinking. Okay, and this is because I think there's even if it's not with recourse to the gods, there's a sense of the divinity in nature, the divinity in the universe. This must express itself through harmony. Okay, it must express itself through the most beautiful sounds that we can possibly imagine, but that we can't hear. Now, according to the ancients, Pythagoras could hear them, or could at least approach them, could at least conceive of them. Right, and this is what makes Pythagoras the kind of exceptional figure from antiquity. And as we'll hear next, his ideas anticipate in some ways modern science and are at least partly true. And from classical antiquity, that's kind of all we can hope for, I think. So in terms of being confirmed by modern science. So thank you. I'm going to hand the floor over now to Chris.